tell us where you're calling in from or where you're viewing in from, and let us know how that works. I know that a number of folks came because they received our invitation through our mailing list, but I know a number of people who joined this meeting have come because we've been promoting this event through many other channels and email directly or the Signal group that's been following these redistricting actions. I would request that John, we've just posted a note in our a link in our chat here to subscribe to our newsletter. And the reason that's important is because as we go forward over the next month or so, that's going to be one of our primary communication channels at keeping you up to date about what's going on and what the next set of actions are. So we really would encourage everybody to sign up for our newsletter, and you can find that link in the chat, and we'll put it in a couple more times. It's free. We do not do a lot of money raising promotions out of that newsletter. You're not going to get spam, trust me, but you're going to be hearing a lot from us as we go into this redistricting special session. So we've got folks here, looks like covering the state so far. Stone Mountain, Sewanee, Decatur. I saw Pooler down by the coast. And I know Beth and John, you're in McIntosh County, right? Down on the coast. That's great. I'll put my name in. I happen to be from Alpharetta, northern suburbs of Atlanta. Don't hold that against me. So welcome. We will be taking questions from the chat tonight. So as we go through the conversation tonight, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. I'm going to let you know that this town hall has changed character from the way we originally advertised it, because originally we were going to just be covering our redistricting poll, and now we've had to really adjust rapidly to the situation and try to cover a lot more material. So we'll do our best to get it all done. We may have an extended Q&A that goes over just a little bit. So thank you all again for joining. And I see some folks are putting in their organization affiliated. Looks like Mary Lazarus from UGA Legislative Action Network. Cool. And oh, Krista Brewer. Hey, Krista, how are you? You're at the Florida Panhandle Beach right now. You'll count as our out-of-state representative for the evening. There may be others from out of state. So again, thank you all for joining. I am Ken Lawler. I am the chair of the Fair 6 Georgia Foundation. With me tonight are members of our research team, Beth and John Stevenson. Our advocacy team is led by Dave Thomas. Our communications team is led by Michael Beach, who I know is here. Julia Leon is also with us, who is a member of our board, as other members of our board are also with us tonight as well. Hildegard Gray. Oh, it's good to see your name, Hildegard. We miss you in Georgia. You were such a huge help to us in finding new volunteers for us and just supporting us. So really great to see you back, Hildegard. And you say you missed you too. Come on back to Georgia. We got lots going on this month. You'll be a lot of chances to get involved. So that's great. Um, it's 5 after 7. I'm actually going to start the presentation now because I think we have so much to cover that we have to get started. But as people join, and we encourage you to just again put your name in the chat where you're calling from. And oh, Woody from Democracy Activist from District of Columbia. Welcome, Woody. You've come to the hottest state in the country, or one of the hottest states in the country, temperature-wise and also redistricting-wise. So I'm going to stop chit-chatting and go ahead and share my slides. Just want to make sure you can all see that. Any questions about that? All good, John? Everybody can see it. Great, great, great. And now we are recording this meeting because that we will make the recording available on our website. And again, place your questions in the chat. So thank you again for coming. We were originally going to do this town hall. We had scheduled this a couple of months ago, I think it was, and we were going to cover our redistricting poll. That was the key feature of this. But since then, the world has been turned upside down on us. The Supreme Court has weighed in, the governor's getting involved, and so we now have a lot more to talk about tonight than just the poll. But we're going to cover all that stuff in one meeting. Here's our agenda. Okay, we're going to try to get a lot done here and get you ready for what's going to happen in about a month in the special session. First topic is the court hath spoken. Big Supreme Court decision in Louisiana versus Calais. We'll talk about what the court said and what they didn't say. We're going to try to give you facts about what we think that court decision really means for Georgia. Secondly, not only has the court spoken, but so have Georgia voters. Our statewide poll, tonight we are debuting that new polling data. We have fresh new polling data. We'll tell you what voters think about redistricting, and we're really basing a lot of our advocacy on what voters want, not what politicians want, right? Then the governor sets the table. As you probably know, if you're joining this meeting, he has called a special legislative session starting on June 17th to redraw maps. We will talk about why he should or shouldn't do that during this meeting and how we're going to approach that. And then we're also going to be talking about our action plan, which is going to include you. There are many opportunities we're going to talk about to get involved in what's going on right now with this redistricting stuff in Georgia. And then we will have time for Q&A. I will tell you that we have a lot to cover because we've now put basically two town halls into one. And so we've tried to compress our content. We're going to leave time for Q&A. We'll try to get to the Q&A no later than approximately 7:45. However, I will commit to you that I will stay on afterwards if we have extended questions we haven't gotten to in the chat. I will stay on as long as I have to help answer questions. I'm not sure if everybody can stay. But at any rate, I will commit that we will go over on questions if we have to, but we'll make sure that we get all the presentation stuff in well before then. So with that, let's talk about what the court said. Um, First of all, let's back up and talk about before this court decision, before the court came down with this decision in April called the Calais decision. What was the policy for the use of race in redistricting, right? Well, this goes back to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It's been adjusted with court cases, big court cases in 1980s, but this has been around. This is 60 years of jurisprudence around how race can be used as a factor in redistricting. And the answer was that race could be used as a factor in redistricting, but race cannot be the predominant factor in drawing districts. However, there was a thing called the Voting Rights Act, and Section 2 said that if you can find a sufficient minority population to draw a compact district, you should do it. That's court cases said you should do that. You have to prove that the minority groups are politically cohesive and that their voting preferences are consistently outvoted by the majority, right? You also have to look at the totality of circumstances. In other words, what's the history of discrimination in this state or this area of a state? So racial demographics could be used as a factor. However, it could not be the only factor, and you had to kind of balance that between traditional redistricting criteria, but also making sure that you provided districts so that minority voters, and in Georgia that typically means black voters, have a chance to elect candidates of their choice. And that's been the history up until April. So, what did the court say in April? Well, I think this cartoon from the ever clever Mike Lukovich and the AJC pretty much sums up the story, right? We are raising the drawbridge here. Now that's a pretty bleak assessment, but I'll give you a little bit more details behind that as we go. So we need to be clear about what the court actually said. There's a lot of politicians out there right now calling for actions to be taken, misinterpreting this court case. We're going to tell you what the court said and what they didn't say. So as you're talking with people, listening to people about this, you know the facts, right? What the court said is they are significantly raising the bar for proving a racial gerrymandering case under the Voting Rights Act. They're not saying the Voting Rights Act is defunct. They're saying they're significantly raising the bar. We'll talk about how far the bar has been raised and why the cartoon is very effective, right? Plaintiffs now have to show a strong inference of discrimination. Somehow you have to prove that what was going on was intentional discrimination of some kind. But in order to do that, the plaintiffs now must disentangle race from a partisan voting pattern. So the court is basically saying if a state decides to draw a map and its intention is to use a partisan voting pattern, if you want to prove that they also discriminated against a racial group, you have to disentangle race and show that independently of the partisan pattern, voters of color are being discriminated against. I'll tell you that this is nearly impossible, and that's why it's so difficult, right? You also have to demonstrate that if you're a plaintiff and you're going to show that an alternative map is a better map for voters of color, you have to show that the map meets the state's redistricting criteria, meaning if the state said there's going to be so many districts for this party, you have to have a map that meets those criteria and that's more fair to minority voters. And you can't use race as a criterion in drawing that alternate map. So that is the logic. That is the actual what the court is actually saying is now the rule as far as proving cases under the Voting Rights Act Section 2. I will tell you that this is now nearly impossible. The Voting Rights Act still exists on paper, but it's nearly impossible to get over these hurdles that they're drawn. And so, as a result of these new rules, the court then ruled, okay, now that we've reset the rules, Louisiana's map, which is the subject of the case, is unconstitutional because the plaintiffs cannot prove against these new rules. So they changed the rules and then ruled on the case. It's kind of a tortured logic, if you ask me, but I don't get paid to be a Supreme Court justice. So that's what the court said. And again, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We'll do our best to answer them. I'm going to move kind of fairly quickly. We're not going to pause for questions, but we will get to them. It's important to know what the court did not say. And what the court did not say is this. They didn't say that racial demographics cannot be considered when drawing maps. You can consider them. Uh, however, uh, however, racial discrimination claims will no longer be considered. And maps drawn in other states, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, I'm saying the wrong thing. They did not say that racial demographics cannot be considered. They did not say that racial discrimination claims will no longer be considered. They've just raised the bar impossibly high. It's very tortured logic. Um, they're not saying that maps drawn in other states are constitutional. And they're not saying anything about Georgia maps at all. This court case does not invalidate in any way Georgia's maps, despite what politicians are saying right now. The Georgia maps are still in place. They have not been invalidated. We'll talk about why people would like to redraw them, but the court did not say that you can't consider race at all. They have not wiped race off the map. So, where does this decision leave us? If you take those, summarize those points, right? Like I said, it's going to be nearly impossible to prove racial discrimination in a redistricting plan. Not there's very weird cases could come up, but it's going to be nearly impossible. But the thing that bugs me, frankly, is that the court has explicitly elevated partisan interest above demographic diversity. Meaning, if a state says, I drew this map because I wanted a certain party to win, well, that trumps your interest in a map that's racially fair. To me, that is putting your thumb on the scale from the court's perspective. Keep in mind that this court said that they would no longer consider partisan gerrymandering back in 2019, and now they're saying that can take precedence over any demographic diversity interest, except under very extreme cases. So really, the Voting Rights Act exists on paper. The opinion of the court claims they've left it intact, but basically it's been wrecked. Let's be clear, okay? And here's the key point. Georgia's maps have not been declared illegal or unconstitutional because the appeals court must weigh in. We'll get to that in a second. I really like what Justice Elena Kagan said in her Calais dissent, basically saying today's decision renders Section 2 all but a dead letter. She dissents because the court's decision will set back the foundational right that was granted in the Voting Rights Act 60 years ago. It'll set it back 60 years. I think she's 100% right. So you have to be careful when people are talking about this case saying, well, race is now out of bounds. It's not. And Georgia's maps have not been declared illegal yet. Okay. But it's going to be a very difficult to prove case. Now, um, the talk about how this affects Georgia, right? So the maps that Georgia drew in 2023 have been appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. That appeal happened in 2024. It appealed by the plaintiffs saying that the maps that were drawn weren't good enough. It also appealed by the state. And the main argument the state is making was, well, this voting pattern is partisan, not racial. Well, the state was pretty clever. They expected the Supreme Court to say partisan trumps racial. So that's part of the state's argument. And what that means is the state's going to win the appeal. That's what's going to happen. But they have not done it yet. But now what happens in the appeal? Well, all the state is asking for here is they're seeking relief from the decision that forced the maps to be drawn in 2023. They're not asking the court to order a new map. They're simply saying, tell us we don't have to worry about that decision from 2023 anymore. My guess is that's exactly what they're going to get. Okay. However, that doesn't mean new maps are required. It means that the legislature, the state, can decide whether to consider changes or not, but they are in no way being ordered or compelled by the law to do that. Okay, and I will tell you that Georgia has so far spent, as far as we know, over $2 million and counting, defending these maps that they drew back in way back in 2021. It's an expensive proposition of taxpayer money. So again, Georgia's maps stand as they are. There's going to be an appeal decision. Uh, I believe what's going to happen is that decision will tell the state, well, you can choose to change your maps or not. Okay. Now, what are politicians saying? Well, Kemp, Burt Jones, Buddy Carter, you can guess what they're saying, but Kemp is saying specifically the decision requires Georgia to adopt new maps. No, it does not. It does not require anything of the sort. Burt Jones is saying we have to be in compliance with today's decision. There's no compliance required. Georgia's maps are still under appeal. You're going to get relief, but there's no compliance required. Buddy Carter went way out of line and said, do it, delay everything and redraw the maps. Okay, that's his take, right? On the other side of the coin, we have three candidates for governor who were to their credit, uh, uh, act, standing up for the right of fair maps and redistricting in different ways. I want to be clear that we are not a partisan organization. We are not advocating for or against any given candidate. We're simply giving you statements of interest. What I'll tell you is that fair maps are on the ballot this year, not just in terms of the governor's race, but in terms of what's going to happen in June and how voters may react to that. So, this nationwide redistricting war has come home to roost in Georgia, and fair maps are now going to be on the ballot when you think about voting this year, right? So again, the message to me is anybody saying Georgia is required to draw maps is wrong. They're not. They're overextending and interpreting the case incorrectly. We don't believe that's true. Even after the appeal comes, we don't know when that's going to come. There's no compelling reason to draw maps at this time. And so that kind of summarizes our point of view. Our point of view is that new district maps should not be drawn either in a special session or in a regular session in 2027 because the Calais decision does not mandate that to happen. And any redistricting prior to 2031 would be optional. We call that mid-decade redistricting. Sorry for the typo there, mid-decade redistricting. We have a terrible history of that in Georgia. We've covered that in prior town halls. Go back and look at our January town hall. I can't remember the last one we did this on. It was April. Actually, we spent a lot of time in this in April town hall this year. It would be an optional change. And the thing to know is that when the maps were redrawn in 2023, they were already gerrymandered from a partisan point of view. Keep in mind what happened. Maps were redrawn to add districts for black voters in the congressional map, the state house, and the state senate. Maps were redrawn. But when those maps were redrawn to add districts for black voters, the legislature said, wait a minute, we're going to lose some seats here, right? So they altered other districts to even the partisan score. So the partisan outcome, the partisan design of the 23 map is very similar to the 2021 map. There is no legitimate reason, for any reason, to redraw maps. Even if the court says you get relief, what's the point? I think we all know what the point might be, right? You grab power when you can get more. And now that the constraints are off around racial gerrymandering, it's going to make it easier. But there's really literally no legitimate reason that we know of that these maps should be redrawn now or until 2031, unless a court orders it, which I don't think is going to happen. So that's where we think we are. Okay. So let's talk about what happens. Calais has raised some interesting questions for us, right? And specifically around those of us who want to advocate for fair maps. So there's still a tricky balance here to ask about to what extent should race be considered when drawing maps? You can consider race. The court did not outlaw that, but you have to be careful not to go overboard. And because you don't have the protection of the Voting Rights Act, how do you do that, right? And really the question is, well, what constitutes fair representation now? If you don't have legal protection of the Voting Rights Act, how do you make sure representation is fair to communities across the state? And so we stepped back and made the question even more robust. We said, what are the characteristics of a fair map in the first place? How do you draw a fair map now that the world has changed? And specifically, what's changed is the legal underpinning of minority representation. So we decided, instead of us making this up, let's ask voters what they think. And that's exactly what we have just recently done. We did a survey, we did a poll, and we did this poll knowing that we wanted to get this update in. So we did this poll back in March. So it was before the court case, but this obviously redistricting was going on across the country. The war was on. We did the poll in March because we wanted to take the temperature of voters and ask them, what do you think about redistricting in Georgia? So I'm going to cover this very briefly. There's a lot more detail I could cover, but in the interest of time, I want to just zip through this. This first chart basically says this poll was a very good cross section of voters in terms of political party, in terms of how they voted in the presidential election, in terms of the racial characteristics, in terms of types of communities. This poll is a very good cross section. We think it accurately represents what voters really think about redistricting. I want to shout out here to our partners, the ACLU of Georgia, Common Cause Georgia, and the League of Women Voters, who helped us, supported creating this poll, have been very instrumental in bringing this to you. Thank you, partners, for that work. We will continue to leverage this going forward, and thank you very much for that support. Um, so, we surveyed a good cross section of voters. What did they say? So, I'm gonna give you the answers right up front. These are the key findings. 75% of voters support that the district should be competitive. Elections should be competitive and districts should be drawn to support that. That's an overwhelming number, and that's across all political parties. Second thing, 60%, and that's a number that has grown since the last poll 4 years ago, would change the law to require nonpartisan map drawing. That again is a pretty darn big majority, if you ask me. Should maps continue to reflect racial diversity? 60% said yes. Should we ban mid-decade changes? 52% said yes. Should map reflect community interests? 51%. Again, all majority. And 58% said, you know what? This should be done by independent commission. Let's take it out of the hands of legislators who have a built-in conflict of interest. These numbers are roughly the same as they were 4 years ago. We think this is, again, a very accurate summary. I'll now take you through a few slides giving you a breakdown of some of these things. I'm going to go rather quickly, but just keep in mind these top line views have now informed our new policy around what makes a fair map. You're going to see we want competitive, we want the maps to be partisan balanced. You'll see all that when we get to that material. So again, quickly I'll step through some of the breakdowns of these numbers, but these are the top lines, and we think they're very compelling. Uh, First item, competitive districts, right? How important is it to you that Georgia's election maps prioritize competitive? Everybody thinks they should be competitive. It's just that simple. There's no two ways about it. And this is across all political parties. That's a pretty strong opinion, if you ask me. I think it's incontrovertible what voters want. Um, Support for making maps drawn in a nonpartisan fashion is actually growing. And interestingly enough, the biggest percentage change between the 2022 survey and the 2026 was among Republicans, who gained by 10%. The others went up just a little bit. The margin of error on this poll is plus or minus 4%. So those minor, 2, 3% change isn't that important. But when you see a 10% growth, you pay attention. So overall, 64% of voters, which is up 6% from the prior poll, agree with this sentiment. The support is definitely growing for making maps, changing the law specifically to make the maps nonpartisan. How about racial diversity? Okay. 60% overall believe this should be true. You can see it obviously is different based on the race of the person answering the question. Obviously, African Americans highly support this, Hispanic, Latinos, and others. The white population is kind of split, but still more say it than don't. You could call that just a tie, if you will. But at the end of the day, across the board of Georgia, right, 60% of voters believe that maps should reflect racial diversity in some fashion. Now, I'll tell you that this survey was taken before the court case came down. Would this change? Would the answer to this question change if you asked it again? Maybe, but I think you would still see roughly the same proportions among these different populations. It might be a little bit more polarized. I'm not quite sure. I really don't know. So that was taken beforehand. However, it was well known that this court case was out there and that the redistricting war was on across the country when this survey was taken. Look at the diversity requirement for diversity by party. The other was split by demographic. By party, it's again it's 60%. You can see that Democrats favor it much more than Republicans. Independents are kind of in the middle. So again, this view could change based on the court case, but at the end of the day, it's still 60% say it's still an important thing to think about when drawing maps. Banning mid-decade redistricting. This is the first time we asked this question. We didn't ask it 4 years ago. We got a pretty good summary here that 52% think it should be banned. However, you can see that overall about a third of the voters weren't really sure. Maybe they didn't understand what mid-decade was. We kind of explained it a little bit in the question, but again, there's fewer people who kind of understand this a little bit, but still you have a pretty clear majority that say we should not be changing maps mid-decade. You should wait until the next census. Again, I'm going quickly here. Sorry for that. Um, and in terms of maps should represent in communities, again, it's about 51% across all the different communities saying, maps should be drawn thinking about us, the voters, and not about politicians choosing their voters. Okay. And one more thing, independent commission, 58%, and again, that's a majority. It's a clear winner among all parties that we should have an independent commission system to draw maps. Basically, give it to independent parties to do that. Okay. Okay. Sorry, put that away. So, I ran through that pretty quickly, but you'll be able to get your hands on this information. We're going to ask you to use this information. It'll be coming soon to our website. I think we're putting a link in the chat right now on the page that it's going to be on. It has not been posted yet. This is the debut of the debut event for this particular poll. This handout will be available to you on our website so you can have access to it and use it in any way you wish. And again, thank you to our partners for their support of this poll. Now, given that what voters said was how they want the maps to be drawn, we can now talk about what do we think a fair map looks like, right? And so this chart is our new policy. This is the first time we're presenting this publicly. Our new policy around what do we mean by fair maps now? What do we mean by it, right? And so, philosophically, the whole point of mapping is this, that maps should reflect and respect Georgia citizens. The map should yield representatives that are a cross section of us. And that cross section crosses boundaries of political boundaries and also diversity and community boundaries, right? And so maps should reflect our political preferences, meaning they shouldn't be tilted one way or the other. We're a swing state. That means the map should be kind of like a swing state map. It doesn't mean the districts would be 50-50, but it should reflect the fact that we have very dense Democratic areas of the state, very dense Republican areas of the state, but we also have a lot of competitive areas of the state. And as we've talked about in past town halls, our maps are not competitive at all today. The competitions have been removed to express a political preference by the map drawers. So we think that maps should reflect the natural political geography, as we call it, and also encourage competition in those areas like suburban Atlanta, like some of the other cities where there is competitive attitudes among voters, where they're divided. The map should reflect the idea that some districts really should be competitive, but they don't today. Um, the second key aspect is that maps should reflect and respect our diversity and communities of interest. So, as defined by citizens and census data, there's a lot of ways to think about what a community of interest is, right? They can be defined socially, they can be defined economically, they can be defined educationally, like around a college campus. They can be defined looking at existing county and city boundaries. But they should also be looking at all demographic groups, including the majority and minorities, right? So maps should reflect this diversity that we enjoy in Georgia and communities as defined. Example of a community of interest, one of the ones I always use is the Vidalia onion farming belt would be a great economic community of interest. It has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with a business interest concentrated in a particular area of the state that's very important to the people in that area, or our university campus community. There's many ways to define these communities of interest. The idea is that maps should reflect all this stuff, that maps should be drawn that way. Today, maps are drawn for one purpose, to achieve a political outcome. We want maps to reflect the natural political preferences and diversity in communities of interest. But also, maps have to comply with the traditional criteria, equal population, contiguity, compactness. Yes, those are doable. You get a mapping tool, you can figure that out. But you should elevate above those questions, you should elevate the idea of respecting the political preferences and respecting diversity in communities. And also, you want to minimize voter movement among districts while you are complying with this. So you're not redrawing districts a lot just for the purpose of political purposes, and a lot of voters get moved around, and ultimately it disrupts the relationship between voters and their representatives. And we see this a lot, and it happened a lot in past redistricting cycles. So this is our new policy and how we're going to start looking at judging maps as they are drawn from this point forward, including what's going to happen in the June special session. So I'm going to carry on here, but this is a very important slide to remember. And we will be posting this policy in some form on our website. We haven't quite figured out where we're going to post it, but this is going to be kind of a key anchor point for our advocacy going forward. Okay, key takeaways from the fair maps. I think I've covered this. They should be built around communities. They should reflect, we should somehow measure how well the maps reflect these communities. We need to measure how well maps reflect racial demographics, both majority and minority now. And we have to measure how well maps reflect political interests in terms of partisan leaning competition. The message to us is it's better to get a fairly drawn map in the first place than file lawsuits because now lawsuits are going to be very, very difficult. There's no way to challenge a partisan gerrymander in Georgia right now, and there's barely a way to challenge a racial gerrymander because of what the Supreme Court has said. So we're better off measuring maps as they're drawn and advocating for that as we go instead of trying to fight back after the fact if we can. Okay. Um, a special legislative session has been called by the governor. It starts on June 17th. It'll last at least a week and a half. We don't know how long it's going to last, but this is going to be a very fast-moving legislative session. The scope of this session, there's two items on the table. The maps, and also they're going to address the ballot barcode issue that some people are very well aware of. Here we are only talking about the redrawing of the maps. The House and Senate committees who handle redistricting and reapportionment will obviously play a key role in reviewing maps and presenting them and discussing and voting on maps before they go to the floor. So that's going to happen starting on June 17th. We're going to have a three-step approach to our advocacy here as we lead up to this special session. Number one, we're going to adopt a new Fair Maps policy. We just did it. We are releasing it publicly tonight to you. You are the first people to ever see it outside of our board members, okay? So that's number one. We have a Fair Maps policy. And our poll basically lays the foundation. We're responding to what voters want, not what politicians want. Number two is we're going to create fair map benchmarks or yardsticks. So when maps are created, we can say, are they fair or are they not? We're going to be publicly releasing these statistical benchmarks before the session, and they will include both demographic and political benchmarks. And then third, as we go into the session, we will then be scoring and grading maps according to our benchmarks. So we're going to offer all this stuff to the public and to legislators in advance. The other thing is that once the benchmarks are available, we would encourage citizens to draw your own maps and grade them. There are tools out there. Just to note, we are not going to be offering a map saying, this is a fair map, use this one. We don't want to do that because if they turned on your map, you've lost the game. We are trying to make sure that any map drawn by anybody, whether it's Democrats, Republicans, or anybody, if it's going through the process in the legislature, we want to measure it against what we think fair looks like. That is our approach to this advocacy. So again, step one, we're doing it right now. We'll talk as we go forward about the other two. Okay. So I think I just spoke to this one. Debut event now. We're going to do a press release with the poll and the policy. We will be conducting some media interviews if we can get them. What can you do about the policy? Well, first, you can copy and distribute the poll summary from our website. You can contact your local media and write your own letters to the editor around what you think fair map should look like as this special session convenes. You can meet with your legislator. I know Dave Thomas is going to talk more about that. You can explain from our poll what we think voters want. You can explain our fair map policy and make it local. When you're talking about this, you can talk about statewide stuff. That's what we do. You got to talk about how it affects you as a community. You want your community's voice to be heard. That's what's critical about this fair maps policy is your community gets a voice. Your community should have a voice in this process. Okay. The next three slides, I'm going to turn it over to our research team led by Beth Stevenson to talk about the benchmarks. Very quickly, an overview of how we're going to do the benchmarks. Beth, take it away.
Okay, I'm on, and I'm gonna, I think it probably is got, oh, there I am. I'm also running the machine. So the FairBAPS benchmarks, we have a research team, and those of you all that are interested in the data and statistics, let us know. We would love some help. We are going to be doing some updated statistical profiles for state maps. So map drawing, for those of you all that are steeped in it, you understand that it's become, it's very computer driven. There's a lot of analysis, a lot of data that's pulled in, and map drawing is actually pretty sophisticated in terms of how the data is looked at. we're going to be looking at statistical profiles for state maps. So we're going to be running a series of state maps and looking at them for demographic diversity. We're going to be looking at how they might operate in terms of the racial minority groups and the majority groups. We're going to be looking at Black, Hispanic, minority coalitions, so all of ethnic minorities, racial minorities, white. And we're going to use a lot of the 2020 census to help us understand that, because that's the data that has not changed. And so when we're doing mid-cycle redistricting, it's primarily to put your thumb on the scale from a political perspective, because there's no new data. So we're using the 2020 census, which is the basic data. We're also going to be looking at political fairness. So you saw the polls, you saw how much people want competition. They want to be able to choose their representative. They don't want their representative choosing them. So to the extent we can look at the competition through a range of maps, the partisan lean. The idea is we're going to be running maps based on a number of the political outcomes over the past few years. We're going to be looking at a lot of them, running these maps then with that data, and then looking at that sweet spot in a kind of essentially a bell curve in a chart. Those that will give us then a range, and we'll be able to turn around and talk to legislators and say, here are the benchmarks for where we think fair maps should be. So X many districts, a range of districts that should be Republican, a range of districts should be Democrat, a range of districts in terms of racial representation, a range of districts around competition. So we're going to be giving them the information up front from the special session to let them know, okay, we're going to be watching, and we've run maps, and we know when maps have been done, so that you're putting the thumb on the scale and you're changing things that are not really representative of who we are in Georgia. So we'll look at these statistical items and be able to give people kind of a range of benchmarks to aim for, to be fair. We're not sure they're going to look at it. We're going to give it to the legislators, and we're going to make sure that the congressional Reapportionment Office that works with the legislators to draw maps also has our information. And when we see maps come out that are not reflective of those benchmarks, we'll be able to say things to them. I think there's another slide. So this is an example from 2021. This is kind of what it looks like. So these bar charts, you can sort of see there's sort of a range of different types of maps. And you can sort of see what we did was sort of say, okay, there's the Democratic seats, and you can sort of say, all right, a good map, an A grade map, this is a little rough, might be, say, 83 to 86. So we'll give that to them. But you can sort of see the enacted map is outside that range. So we'll be able to say, this is where you are. You're not in that sweet spot where those benchmarks should be. And then, so you look at the range of competitive seats, same enacted map from 2021, and you'll see it's way outside the sweet spot. So when their maps come out, we're going to quickly compare a map that they might have pulled together for the special session, compare it to where we know the sweet spot is in terms of those benchmarks that we've identified and given to them ahead of time. We're going to be looking at it and saying, okay, this map you've drawn is really not meeting the benchmark. We'll be able to say that very directly, and we'll be able to tell the public that, and news articles and those types of things. So we're going to be running this information, based on the data that I showed you in the previous slide. We're running that over the next couple of weeks so that we can identify what those benchmarks are. And then we will make that very public, and all of you all will have access to what should be a fair map. You also can take those benchmarks, and as Ken was saying, there are programs where you can go in and do your own maps and sort of play with it to see what would look fairer to you. The Fair Maps Bar Chart, we said public release before the session starts, going to be up on our website. We're going to get media coverage. The leverage we have is to be able to say, here's where the fair maps would fall. Here's where the ranges of things that we would be looking at, the competition, the racial balance, the partisan lean, and we'll be looking at those and laying out benchmarks ahead of time. And then our leverage is to be able to say, you're nowhere near these benchmarks, or yeah, you hit it on this. So you can kind of see some of the things that the next step. So this initial, we've got our poll results, but then the next piece is some of the same things: letters to the editor, meeting with legislators, explain why these benchmarks are important. They're the place where we would expect our maps to be if you weren't putting your thumb on the scale, to create partisan issues, or to try to create a whole lot of fair, safe seats for Republicans or Democrats. Or you're, from a racial perspective, you're sort of saying this is what it should look like. And you can kind of see here you've got Dave's redistricting as one of the tools that you can use for looking at maps. Also gives you a sense of the complexity of that. Okay. All right. Ken has muted
We're
himself.
going to turn it over to Dave Thomas now, who's going to pick up from here.
Thanks, Ken and Beth, for giving us a roadmap so far. So just one of the examples of outreach you can do, there are a lot of organizations that are going to be getting involved in this. We will be partnering with them and publicizing them. 50501J is already up and running as far as a campaign to contact legislators. So we just wanted to feature it on here so people could participate if they want to. It is not the only one and will not be the only one, but it's one that's out there early. So we thought we wanted to honor people and respect people that we think we're going to be working with. So if we can go on to the legislative advocacy slides. Perfect. So we have two major windows that we have to operate here. One of them is prior to the legislative session, and the other one is once the legislative session starts. Let's go back to the last slide.
My laptop is acting up. I shall have to monitor the button here. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. We can roll with it. And so there are kind of overlapping things or related things between the two of them. The key thing here is we do not want to wait till the session starts to be getting our ground game going. One of the early things is to engage with partner organizations. What we learned from the last legislative session is that if you want to influence the legislators, they have to hear from a lot of constituents. And we have a lot of people that are members of Fair Districts Georgia, but there are a lot of other organizations who also want to play in this game, and we want to make sure we coordinate with them. And we also want to do early contact with key legislators, meetings specifically. We'd like to start with the House and Senate leadership because we want to influence the process. We'll talk about how in a little bit more detail. And then from there, we'll move on to committee chairs and then actual committee members. And in particular, at that level, we want to engage constituents, voters, to actually participate in this process. It's one thing if Fair District Georgia shows up. It's another thing if their actual constituents show up. So we're actually looking for people to help us in that process. And we also want to offer assistance, early assistance with map evaluation. We have a lot of technical background, a lot of technical skills, particularly aligned with our partners. And it would be helpful to be talking about that before the session actually starts. If nothing else, to alert the legislators as to what tools and what kind of evaluation we are going to be bringing to the table. Next slide. The early stuff that we're working on or will be working on prior to the session, the process related stuff, it's got two major components. One of them is transparency. We want the information about how these maps are formed and what the thought process is, what information was accessed. We want that available to the public. That's basically what this first bullet is about. And it's not just that the stuff is out there, but the public and other people need to be made aware. So there are some notifications that we would like to see built into the process, specifically when votes are going to be taken and any significant steps are taken in this process. So that's what an early thing we will be discussing with the leadership to try to get it out there. Next one. So during the session, we'll be doing map evaluations. We're going to plan and organize testimony, and then we are going to try to engage in rapid response to the public. So when there's information we think people need to have, we'll try to get that out there very quickly. Also, we'll participate in demonstrations, but we're not planning to be a leader in that. I think there's some technical support and some technical information that we can provide, but organizing demonstrations is not our core competency and may actually distract us from some of the technical aspects that we need to stay on top of. Having said that, we think there's going to be a demonstration on June 17th at the Capitol, or actually at Liberty Plaza. We were on a Zoom session on that last night, and it's still evolving, but the general message here is stay tuned in to get more details about the June 17th demonstration timing and structure. So I'd like to drill down now on the testimony aspect of it. We ourselves want to testify, but we want to coordinate with other organizations to testify, and we want to have constituents and representative leaders coming to testify. So the main thing is going to be trying to testify around this concept of communities of interest. We think working from the ground up, this is the basis for how these maps should be drawn. And communities of interest are essentially being defined now because we haven't leaned on them so much in the past for past maps. And they come in a lot of different ways. So, for example, municipalities, suburbs, and exurbs could all be a community of interest. And that would be one of the sources of the leadership that we would like to come in and testify. So, for example, keeping some of these municipalities intact may be very important. The leadership from these municipalities should be the people coming and making that case if that's what they want. There are some historic minority areas. And for example, again, just to cite another example, coastal recreation community or communities could be a community of interest. And the list is limitless. Some of them come predefined for us already, courtesy of the census. And so we'll probably be leaning on that a lot. And then just stuff from looking at a map. So some of the possible testimony themes are right away challenging the legality or the validity of this session. Why are we doing it? Why now in particular? And there really is no rush to do this, particularly because it's not going to be in effect until the 2028 election. Fair map, we want to be able to put the concept of fair map in front of the legislature, and specifically, as you've been hearing so far, big emphasis on communities of interest, which we think should be the basis for a lot of this work. Expose the poll findings, let the legislators know what the voters want, particularly because in our communications in the last session, we heard that that was pretty important. And do map scores. We expect that there are going to be 6 maps that we have to grade, a set from each party probably for the both chambers of the state legislature and then the congressional districts. And then again, make our plea that we just think this is fundamentally wrong from the point of view of it's a mid-decade redistricting. That horse has probably left the barn already, but we want to keep that issue in play in front of legislators and the voters. We also want to do continued rapid response to the public, and this will probably be based on media interviews, opinions and editorials, letters to the editor, and there'll be some direct contact from the FDGA. And again, participating in demonstrations, it's likely that there are going to be almost continuous demonstrations, or at least a string of them throughout the legislative session, and we want to support those in whatever way we can. We actually are partially in that process already. There was a May 1st press release relative to the Calais decision. Then there was a May 15th press release that we did relative to the special session. And there was an op-ed for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that is in the works right now. We think we're on the verge of actually getting that published. The work will continue. Press releases on the poll and fair map policy, that's coming out. Benchmarks as we manage to make them and they evolve. And then just coverage for the in-session advocacy. And we encourage you all, other people, and you all in particular, to reuse these messages for your local media. This stuff is not specific to the Atlanta area. It basically is relevant statewide. And just to kind of retrace some of this, this is the toolkit of advocacy tools, some of which we've talked about, some of which we have not talked about, but may be considered as part of our toolkit. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go ahead and go through them in detail. And the last thing I want to do is make a plea for volunteers for moving forward. It falls in two areas. One of them is the legislative engagement. We are looking for volunteers to do testimony, office visits, particularly in home districts. We would like to get key players, maybe in their home districts or certainly at the Capitol when they're there, telephone calls, emails. So for any of this legislative engagement, if you're interested in participating in that, you can use our advocates at fairdistrictsgeorgia.org. Just send to that, and that will go to me, basically. And I'll get back to you to try to organize. For any of this stuff, testimony, office visits, telephone calls, and emails, you will not be working alone. You don't have to be working alone. We will give you facts. We will give you messages and help organize this stuff. There's also another group you can help with. Well, sorry, several other ways. You can subscribe to the Fair Districts newsletter. We encourage you to do that. That's going to be our main forum for getting messages out. You can also work with public engagement as far as volunteering with that. We need skilled help in website content posting. It's WordPress only, no coding, so you don't have to be a coder. Facebook and Instagram alerts, email and newsletter alerts. Again, MailChimp using templates, no coding. And the contact for that is Michael Beach, and you can reach him at comms@fairdistrictsgeorgia.org. So it's essentially the same as the last email address. It's just comms instead of advocates. And the general message on this is don't worry if you're contacting the wrong person or the wrong email. Just get us a message that you want to volunteer or participate in some way, and we will sort out really who should be dealing with you. And we're also planning another town hall before the next session, or before the session, sorry. That would normally be on a shorter interval than we would try to do a town hall. But since this thing is moving so fast, we think we're going to need at least one more town hall before the session starts. So I think I'm going to turn it back to Ken now and let him pick it up to wrap up and start with questions.
Yep. So we're going to shift to the question and answer period right now, but I'm just going to make one pitch, and that is you can always support us financially if that's your cup of tea. We typically do not do a lot of fundraising emails and stuff, but we're going to be spending a lot of resources, a lot in a short period of time to bring about these benchmarks, this research work, and all the advocacy work. And so there's two ways to support us, both through the same website, fairdistrictsga.org/support. You can support either the foundation, which is the research and education side, which is the tax deductible side, and there's a non-tax deductible side that works on all the advocacy work. Take your pick. We would love your financial support always. But really, the message tonight is to get involved with some of the other things that we're trying to get done. So I'm going to stop presenting now. Just take the slides down. But if you have a question on one, we'll come back to that. And now we're ready to take questions from the chat. And I think that is John our question moderator? Is that correct? Or is it Beth? Who's moderating questions here?
I think Michael, maybe.
I was thinking John was.
Okay,
Oh.
well,
Who read the chat?
Yeah, I can, yeah. Sorry, I can go back up and
Yeah, I can jump in. That's fine. This is Michael.
hold
Um, let's see. So I'm scrolling back through.
I'll start the front.
Just a quick one, Ken. How does all of this affect state house and senate seats?
A lot, really a lot. The nationwide war is over the congressional seats, but the damage, if there's the most damage, can be done here in our state house and state senate because there's just a lot of districts to be moved around, and I'm concerned about the congressional map as well. There's just slightly less opportunity there, although I mean, once you open the patient for surgery, all sorts of weird things can happen. But I'm actually concerned quite a lot about a number of districts, and really the reason that it's of higher concern in my mind is that the party in power may try to create for themselves a permanent majority or a semi-permanent majority, setting us back multiple years in terms of representation in the state. And since so many of our policies are done in the state, including a policy on redistricting, it could be very serious. So, really very concerned about the all three maps, but we'll be paying attention to all three of them. But I think there could be serious damage. Again, I hate to speculate that someone's going to do something wrong, but I think we all know what's going to happen, right? And so, very concerned about all three maps, but state assembly really could be critical.
Just for folks to know, yes, we will post the presentation and the video on the website. Somebody's asking about, sorry, there's a new law about nonpartisan districts in Atlanta. Sorry, the governor signed that law. That's about the legislature or somebody suing over it, not really the purview of this group. From Becky, for population, basically, are we looking at any newer data than the 2020 census, like the American Community Survey, to try and inform how there has been growth in certain areas and decline in others in Georgia over the 6 years since the 2020?
Yeah, I think the answer is generally not. We believe the 2020 census is a much more statistically solid survey. I don't actually know what kind of comprehensive data you get out of an ACS update. We're also concerned about setting a precedent there. We are offering. We believe the answer should be to ban mid-decade changes for any reason other than if a court orders you to do it. So once you start thinking about changing because the population shifted mid-decade, you open yourselves up to mid-decade changes, which our history in Georgia, unfortunately, is that in the 70 times it's happened since 2005, it's always been for partisan reasons. So we kind of disfavor that idea. I suppose that anecdotally, if somebody came forward with a case and said, look, I'm going to talk about my community here, and my community grew a lot, and I'd like you to take that into account when you're drawing the map, I think that could be a valid conversation. If you have a community that's grown, maybe a city that's annexed a lot of people, and you'd like to say this city is different than it was, 5 years ago, I think that could be valid. But on a statewide level, we tend to try to stick to the definitive decennial census for that reason.
Okay, the next question is, do we have any hints about the process that the state will use during this special session?
I'll try to answer that, but I just want to say that it's 8 o'clock, and I'm going to stay on and keep answering questions. Maybe I don't know, Dave. Can you have a few extra minutes to stay? Or are you okay? We'll stay on and answer as many questions as we can, and we know it's near at the end of the hour. Again, for those of you who need to leave, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your support. Hopefully, there's lots of ways to get involved, and just please stay tuned to us. This has all come together very quickly. So back to that question, Michael, the process. Um, Honestly, I think it's going to look like an assembly line for maps. We saw this happen in the 2023 session. It was a redistricting session mandated by the court. They got the map. Typically, the map's going to get introduced on one day. If we're lucky, we get a day's advance notice. It'll be then heard in a committee the second day. That would be the redistricting committee. Let's say it's a Senate map. It'll start in the Senate committee. The committee will quickly review the map and then likely vote on it. There probably will be a competing proposal from each party. They might take 1 or 2 days at the most, and they're going to vote. And then that map will then, that bill, essentially, it's like a bill going to the legislature. It would have to go to the Rules Committee the next day and potentially get to the floor. Now, the different chambers have slightly different timing rules, but I would expect we're going to see a House committee look at House maps, a Senate committee look at Senate maps. They may be going on in parallel. We might have to be in two different rooms at the same time, which is why Dave's call for help at testifying might be very, very important. We want to pack those hearing rooms so these people know that we are watching every single move, right? So those could be going on in parallel. Those maps would then pass one chamber on a floor after the floor debate, cross over to the other side. The process repeats, right? And then at some point in the process, out pops a congressional map. Don't know if it would start on Senate or House side. Don't know how that works. But that congressional map would go through the same process. Now, those maps could come in different order. We have no idea what the order is going to be. We have in the past been surprised where a map comes out in the morning and they want to do a hearing in the afternoon. That's how tough this could be. So I expect them to try to get this done as quickly as possible. They will be, assuming they're going to hear testimony. They normally do. I would be shocked if they try to not do that, but I think they'll be hearing testimony. But I think they're going to limit the time. We're going to have to be very efficient with how we say what we say. But I think they're going to want it. They're going to want to do this at like an assembly line, maps, crunch, just as fast as they can get this done. Again, it's at least a week and a half if you just lay out the timeline. That's basically the process. Committee, vote, floor, vote, crossover to the other side, committee, floor, vote, you're done. Or then governor signs them, right? So it's going to be very, very fast.
So, just to put that very shortly, this is not going to be a long, open, transparent, free access or fair process. It's going to be a bulldozer. And so that's why we need to be there in wait. Dave, just for you, Nina's asking, will you provide training, review ground rules, help focus messages, and coaching for the audience?
The short answer is yes. We will not let anybody go in there unprepared, or at least not unprepared to the extent that we can support you.
Gotcha. Joyce is asking, do we have anyone inside that will help us understand the process and keep us up to date with the actual and accurate goings on so that we can respond?
That is a great question. That's really a great question. I know that some folks, I know Becky Evans is with us tonight, who is a former legislator. I'm not sure if Terry Anulowitz is as well. Former legislators have knowledge of how the inside process works. Quite possibly, they can cozy up to their former colleagues and see if they can keep us in touch with what's going on. To a large extent, we have to roll with the punches there, right? And just be very, very vigilant. Watch the committee when the committee hearing schedule is posted. They'll post a notice that they're going to hold a hearing. And usually it at least basically describes what they're going to talk about. High level, there's going to be a map. So I'm not sure if we would declare we have an insider, but we probably have enough contacts that will get some clue. But we're just going to have to be reacting pretty quickly.
Yeah. Ken,
Yes, Becky.
hey, yes. I was just saying, I did look at the committee members on reapportionment and made a list of a few that I think we could reach out to and just talk. They're willing to, have texts with us, about if there's anything going on. But of course, the Democratic members of the committee may not know any more than your average person, or it could be we could, and I do think it's appropriate, and I hope that we'll make an effort. If we have benchmarks very soon, we'll send them to Chairman Leverett. I mean, so I think we definitely but he's not going to be telling us what's going on, but yeah, I would say, but those contacts have not been made with reapportionment committee members to say, are you willing to be our personal, like keep us abreast of things, but we can
Right.
make those asks.
Yeah, and I think Dave made some key points that says we're going to try to reach out to legislators in advance, and basically we're going to offer help. Now they could turn us down, but
Hmm.
we want them to know what we're doing, and we're going to offer help to say, if you give us a sneak preview of the maps, we can give you some help, right? Whether or not that works, who knows? But again, I think this is going to be a very fast process.
And finally, Harry, very long. Thank you for your very long submission here in the chat. I think Harry's talking about uh, one-person districts are just in the long term are going to be an issue. We need to be thinking about proportional representation. Agreed, and that needs to move forward as well. I think it can maybe just kind of chime in that this is a multi-level process here because proportional districts still need to be drawn, and I and it's a Swiss cheese sort of thing. You've got to have multiple slices to keep putting together to really fix this process. So we're not thinking that the single person fair districts rewrite is the only thing that needs to be done. It's one of the issues to really rethink how we do elections and how we build competition into things. But go ahead,
Yeah, I
Dan.
think Harry's on a really important point. I just read a piece in the New York Times the other day about there was an interview with somebody from the Times who is an expert in this space, and really it's a paradigm shift to think about electing a proportional representation instead of electing a particular member for you. You elect enough members from your party so that there's balanced representation. It's a different model, and I think absolutely that we should be thinking about advocating for those kinds of models in the future, because that can, if it's done right, I think Harry's correct that you eliminate the problem of uh, who wins that district, and what you're really trying to achieve is a legislature that represents your political preference. Now, the challenge to that process, the challenge to that is that we still want community and voice, right? And so we want communities to feel like they have a voice in the process. And to some extent, those two run against one another. These large multi-member districts or like a parliamentary system might run counter. I don't think we've done enough thinking about that. I'm not sure anybody has, to be honest with you, but I'm very well aware that arising out of this nationwide war around single district redistricting is this idea that proportional representation may be the way to wipe out the problem and start over, right? It's a very compelling question, a very interesting question. Um, Frankly, probably our organization should spend more time after this session thinking about, well, is there a better way to do this in the first place? And maybe add that to our advocacy kit. But so right now we are operating on the assumption that we're dealing with a single member district problem, and how do you deal with that model? So thank you, Harry, for the suggestion, and you are hereby nominated to help us formulate that policy.
That's right. And I think it is one of those things again, as we've talked about independent commissions, is that from the legislative standpoint, there is an incentive to retain power and reduce competition and keep your incumbents in power. And so there will be proportional representation. You still have to do it fairly to actually make that proportion appropriate.
Yeah, and I think Harry mentions in his comment, I'm reading more of it, is that it probably would require a Georgia constitutional amendment to bring that about. I'm
Yeah.
guessing that's true. Heavy lift, but if you're going to lift something heavy, do it right. I mean, the independent commission is also is a state constitutional amendment. So that would be a worthy debate in our state legislature to say, we'll see who's in charge in 2 years or next year to see whether they're interested in maybe some kind of a legislative study committee to go look at redistricting in a totally new way. Such a committee was, I think, enacted back in the 05, 06 timeframe after the last round of bad gerrymandering. And, or I should say, we've had lots, but there was a particular round. And actually, the Republicans proposed and ran a study committee. I don't remember the exact dates, but one of the outcomes of that study committee was commission. Guess what? An independent commission, which was proposed and never has not gone anywhere. So I think it's worthy of debate, worthy of discussion.
And just note that there was proposed legislation even last session for a commission and for the ability for Georgia voters, again, constitutional amendment, giving the ability to put on citizen-initiated ballot initiatives, which is not part of the Georgia Constitution at this point in time. But we would like to see that because I'm pretty sure we could get something on the ballot if it was possible to do it under the Georgia Constitution.
Right.
Ken, you had an earlier question from Barbara. Is there any way to reverse the new nonpartisan designation of only Metro Atlanta districts?
Honestly, have no idea, and it's kind of outside our bailiwick, to be honest with you. Really, I cannot. I'm not qualified to answer that question.
That's everything that I could. Let me just
Okay.
check and see if
Okay.
anybody's added anything here.
Well, Harry keeps piping in on this point about
Oh,
proportional
okay.
representation. I'm reading his comment. It's not a question, but Harry would love to have further involvement with you thinking through this with us. So you're hereby anointed as a policy volunteer with to help us figure it out. Thanks for reaching out. And if you could do me a favor, Harry, and send one of the emails to one of our maybe take to the advocates email so we can identify you. We probably have your information from the Zoom from the Eventbrite, but would love to talk more about this. Probably not until July, but or later. Yeah. Okay.
And this is Michael. Just apologies to some folks had trouble getting in. I saw in some of the comments there on Eventbrite. We continue to work with this platform to perfect things, but I know it can be challenging at the end. I wish it didn't say register here, and that's really the join
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
town hall.
We are going to rework that registration process to make it so that it's a lot more seamless. And we will next town hall. We promise we'll try to do it in a little bit less clunky fashion. Okay, is that it, Michael?
That's it.
All right, listen, everybody, thank you so much, and stay tuned. We're all in this together. I know there are a lot of organizations involved in this, many of whom are here tonight. Thank you very much for coming. Your help is appreciated. Your support is appreciated. We'll see you again. I think we'll close the meeting.